Good evening and welcome to the Late Debate. This week, the government told councils how much money it was giving them to provide local services over the coming year. Is it enough, or will it mean more cuts? Tonight, I'm joined by three council leaders from the capital to hear their verdict. But first, London MPs weren't exactly overjoyed at the news. Local government finance isn't the most glamorous topic debated in the Commons, but it affects every one of us. And for backbench MPs, it was a chance to name-check their local council.
By next year, Newham will have lost 48% of its grants, £138 million a year.
Although an efficient authority like Bromley will balance its budget this year, in 4 years' time, unless we have change, they will have a funding gap of between 20 to 30 million.
Slough has been the hardest hit town in the southeast. In fact, it's been the 10th worst hit nationally in relation to austerity measures from this government.
It is particularly tragic in this context that authorities such as mine, London Borough of Westminster, have removed all funding from their youth service, from their after-school services and from their holiday schemes.
But the government insisted the new funding package amounted to a cash increase of almost 3%.
It is therefore right that out of the over £1 billion of extra funding committed at last year's budget, £650 million will be going towards adults and children's social care in 2019-20. This will help meet pressures from an ageing population.
The London boroughs say it still leaves them £500 million short of what they need. To run the rule over that financial settlement, I'm joined by the elected Mayor of Newham, Labour's Roxana Fiaz. For the Conservatives, the leader of Bexley Council, Theresa O'Neill. And for the Liberal Democrats, the leader of Sutton Council, Ruth Dombey. Welcome, all of you. Roxana, first of all, can I ask you, we heard Lynn Brown there say that Newham's facing a deficit of £138 million. What sort of challenges does that bring to you?
It brings and presents a huge number of challenges for us as a London local authority, not least because we, like many local authorities in the London context, are facing huge significant crisis with regards to housing, with regards to young people services, adult social care. Local government generally is at breaking point. The 3% increase that the Secretary of State muted in Parliament just seems absurd in the London context, where we are bearing the brunt of some 30% of cuts, and we are at breaking point.
Theresa, you must be torn. We heard Bob Neal, one of your MPs down in that part of London, talking about the pressures on local authorities down there. Your MP, James Brokenshire, the Secretary of State. Whose side do you take, Bob's or James?
So we'd all like more money. There is no doubt about that. And London faces, extreme pressures and certainly more pressures than the rest of the country. But the reality is that part of our problem is the fact, and what they're trying to address is through the fair funding formula, is to actually balance it out. So at the moment, I have a neighbour that gets about 2.5 times what we get.
Who's that?
It'll be Greenwich. And frankly, if we got the same money as they got, I could either cut about 30% off our council tax, or we wouldn't have to save anything for the next 4 years. Deprivation in London has changed considerably, and a lot of the things that used to be a problem in central London only have moved to the outer boroughs. So, we have extreme pressures not only on, children's social care and housing now that we may not have had in the past, but we've also got a high elderly population as well. So
have you
very
seen
difficult.
That, Ruth, deprivation migrating to the outer suburbs?
Absolutely. You can see that some of the issues that were typical of inner London boroughs are moving to outer London. And of course,
such as what?
So we've got a lot more homelessness, we've got a lot more people in temporary accommodation, we've got a lot more people using our food banks. The fact that the use of food banks goes up in the school holidays just breaks my heart, because that's parents who can't afford to feed their children. But the thing about the reductions in funding, about the cuts, it's been going on since 2010. And while at the beginning you could argue we can find different ways of doing things, sharing services, linking up with other boroughs, we're really down to the bone now. As was mentioned, you've just heard, over £500 million worth of savings, and that isn't a one-off. That means that every year we have to spend that much less, and we've got more and more people moving into our boroughs with higher needs and higher expectations.
Roxana, you've just taken over the council from Sir Robin Wales, who ran it for an awful long time. What have you found when you've opened the books?
Well, I mean, certainly a need to find the funding to address some of the acute pressures that my two colleagues have muted during their contributions. You know, we have got significant complexity in terms of challenges. We have, of all local authorities in the country, the largest youth population profile. We've got significant issues around safeguarding and risks. We've got an issue with regards to young people and issues of safety. We've got 7,500 families in temporary accommodation. That's with families with children. You know, the highest number relative to the whole of the north of England.
You must
combined.
regret Newham's decision to blow an awful lot of money on investing in the Olympic Stadium.
I've made a statement with regards to the former administration's investment in the stadium. It's massively regretful because that's £42 million that could have been spent in much needed service delivery for amongst the most poorest residents in this country. And I appreciate the point, Teresa, that you've made in relation to, you know, the complexity of need that's emerged now in your borough, in Bexley, because those issues that were previously uniquely inner London issues have now become all of London issues. But that's not necessarily the reason or the argument to accept the current funding sort of formula and distribution that's been proposed.
I didn't say that. Actually,
Do you all presumably think the current system is broken?
No, what I said was we're going into a fair funding review that's going to reconsider how that cake is carved up, and I know, you know, spending formula will make a difference to how big that cake is, but the fair funding formula will determine what the distribution is.
But Teresa, it isn't about the distribution, it's about how much money there is in the system. We can argue
but
until we're blue in the face
that's
about
that's the debate
north,
for
south,
later on, isn't
absolutely,
it?
but if there isn't enough money in the system, we're never going to have a fair funding
But that's
review.
the debate for later on. The debate to start off with is actually reconsidering what the need is and how the cake is actually carved up.
You see, I don't
That's
agree.
the
I think
first
it's
debate.
how much money do we need to ensure that needs are met, and then we can talk about how we're going to distribute
But it's not a matter of that, is it, realistically? What's going to happen is we're going to have a spending review with the business rates review, and then later on there will be part of the bigger picture of government.
Let's cut down to what people really care about. Are you all going to have to cut more services?
Yes.
We'll have to change services. So, yeah, my administration have saved about £100 million over the last 10 years. The reality is what we've done is we've tried to change it. And one of the
that must mean
strong parts, it hasn't been easy. One of the strong parts, though, is being able to have a 4-year budget. So we've been able to work at it. So we haven't had to salami slice and do it year by year just to balance the budget. Where we are at the moment with the fair funding formula, we need some certainty for the future, because actually you can work at things a lot easier, change services, innovate, and make sure it impacts less.
Ruth, what are you going to have to cut?
So Teresa's right. We're learning to do things differently, working with the NHS, working with the police. My worry is the things that are going to go is the preventative, the early intervention work, because as we get more and more, as Rox said, down to the bone, we're not going to be able to do some of that extra stuff that in the long run is going to have tragic consequences for people. If we only concentrate on the people with the highest need, which is really important, how are we going to stop people then falling into that high need? And that's my worry for the future.
Roxana, could you see cuts coming down the line?
Presently, we are managing on the basis of the budget position that's been presented to us. We are needing to make, given the complexities of issues concerning young people, able to present a budget proposal where we're going to be invested some 10.6 million in children and young people services, but it doesn't reflect actually the ongoing demand that is going to be facing my borough when I've got a situation in 15 years' time I'm going to have more young people than I am going to have older people in terms of my population profile.
And this latest settlement focuses a lot more on older social care, doesn't it?
Well,
which is necessary and vital.
The social care green paper to allow for that to come forward.
And regretfully, it's been delayed, and it creates a huge amount of uncertainty for local authorities who want to rightly provide certainty for our most vulnerable elderly residents who have given so much to this country.
And a lot of us have got into that space.
Teresa, you're from a Conservative authority. Are the days of council tax cuts and smaller bills over?
I'm not sure, to be quite honest. Part of it will be dependent about what happens this year. So, you know, let's get the see what's going to happen with a fair funding formula, with the spending review, with the adult social care paper. You know, I think other parts of government could learn lots from local government. We've been very creative. We've all got into the preventative area very, very early, and we're doing some really innovative work that's making a difference.
OK, lots more to talk about. As if councils in London didn't have enough to do trying to balance the books, the online revolution is throwing up some unexpected new challenges in their direction. Housing, for instance. Who wouldn't want to live in a house like this? Park West is a luxury apartment block close to Marble Arch, but that doesn't make it exclusive because anyone can move in thanks to websites and apps like Airbnb. Westminster Council reckons a fifth of the flats are being rented out on short-term lets. The council claims some have even been used as brothels.
We think there's around 100 flats that are being short-term let on any night of the week. And that's a significant amount of disruption both for people living elsewhere in the block here and for the surrounding area. So it's cars and taxis turning up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, people getting out with cases, they're a bit noisy, they're a bit high, they've just perhaps got off an aeroplane or off a coach, what have you. And it's just really, really disruptive in terms of noise.
We know that every homeowner has a unique story, and that's also
short-term letting platforms have a seductive message.
Whether you want to do it yourself and make a lot of money, or would
this one's Home Away. There are others, but the brand leader is Airbnb.
Everything is just beautiful.
It's reckoned a typical London host can earn £3,500 a year. There are rules capping short-term lets to 90 days, but some politicians say new laws are needed to force letting platforms to hand over data.
Airbnb have led the way by enforcing the 90-day limit themselves, but what that doesn't do is prevent people from hopping between platforms. I think now we're getting to the stage where the mayor is going to have to go to the government and ask them to change the law.
But the government appears wary about legislation and over-regulation.
I think we need to monitor the development carefully as to how the impact on neighbours and people living around those areas, actually the areas of property that are being let. But ultimately, I think it's how we have a vibrant place for London to attract tourists, to have people coming to our capital city, spending that money, and how we benefit enormously from that.
Westminster tries to collect evidence against tenants who persist in letting properties beyond the legal limit of 90 nights in 1 year. But it's difficult, time-consuming and costly. In Westminster alone, officials are investigating more than 1,300 cases. My Capital panel of council leaders here to discuss that. For Labour, Newham's elected Mayor Roxana Fiaz. For the Conservatives, the leader of Bexley Council, Theresa O'Neill. And for the Liberal Democrats, the leader of Sutton Council, Ruth Dombey. Roxana, you've got lots of lovely new flats in the Olympic Park. Do you expect to see that sort of thing happening?
Well, I'm certainly obviously interested in what your package presented in terms of the challenges and the issues that the Westminster Council are contending with. And I think, you know, for the Secretary of State to be talking about the need to maintain London as a global capital city that is vibrant, that is clean, that is attractive to tourists, well, certainly what's not going to make it attractive to tourists if there are ongoing issues of people living rough on the streets, which is a huge challenge that local authorities in the London context are facing, you know, and families living in temporary accommodation and significant numbers of individuals.
The council house waiting list in London is something like 230,000
It's phenomenal.
families. Are you all doing all you can, or could you be doing more to solve the housing crisis?
We could be doing more. In Bexley, we have a growth strategy that could bring about something like 30,000 houses, but we want good growth, and that means the infrastructure. And for us, that's finishing out.
So what does that mean in simple terms?
So in simple terms, Crossrail 1 was stopped in 2008 to come to Abbey Wood. And you've therefore got a gap between Abbey Woods and Ebbsfleet that's not going to have any Crossrail connection. The St John Armitt report recently around the Thames Estuary said if that gap was filled, then you have the opportunity right along brownfield sites to actually grow out London, possibly about 30,000. But what's more is actually giving the connection to the Kent area. And we know people, you know, want to live in the South East. They want to live in London and the South East. That could deliver more for London and for housing than actually the Oxford-Cambridge link.
Ruth,
Strategies are great, but I think we need to actually start building. So in Sutton, we've set up our own development company, and as a result, we're building new homes. And I think it's really important that local government takes back that strong heritage that we had. It was local government that built the sewers, it was local government that built council homes, and we need to take back that heritage.
Is it right that you've just spent £11 million buying back 44 homes that were sold under Right to Buy?
Well, I wasn't aware of that, but I'm sure you're right. That is a problem for us, isn't it? Because as we need to have enough places for people to live, obviously Right to Buy has allowed people to buy their own homes. If that is true, and I'm sure you're right, I wasn't aware of that number, then it's really quite worrying. I'm sure across London the number must be huge.
It's a significant campaign that we're advancing. Right to Buy has led to an exacerbation of a skewed housing market in London. We have
It was very popular with a lot of Labour voters.
So, example, Newham, we built 1,800 council homes, of which 800 have been sold through Right to Buy. And what we are seeing through our data, because we've got a private landlord licensing scheme whereby anyone that wants to operate in the private rented sector has to be licensed by our local authority. And we're noting, actually, our Right to Buy properties, which are supposed to be for our people, are being flipped into the private renting sector within 2 days. Now that's outrageous. I mean, that's basically the most obscene incentive for the private sector on the back of, you know, people that really need homes, and it needs to stop, and we'll be campaigning
people
for.
are still living in those homes, so the answer has got to be more homes. And so therefore, if you've got the opportunity to do that, that's what must be the priority.
You've got the land in your
We've got land, but actually we want good growth. We don't want growth at any cost, and that means you've got to have infrastructure. And that's not just transport infrastructure, that's got to include health infrastructure and the schools as well. What we want, our aspiration, is that other people will have the quality of life that Bexley residents have now. So more people coming in, and also the existing residents to benefit from new people coming into the borough as well.
But it's actually quite fundamental to ensure, going back to the short film that was produced in terms of the effects of Airbnb, and that restricts the availability of properties for Londoners to be able to live in London. We shouldn't have a situation where there are parts of London that are no-go zones for, you know, the London population. Yes, we welcome tourists, but clearly that film calls for a requirement to regulate the market. You just cannot have an unfettered system where companies you know, take advantage of people wanting to earn a few, you know, some more money.
Well, Airbnb, for one of the platforms, says actually that it's put millions of pounds into Londoners' pockets through its platform.
Which is fine, but also, as the short film has set out, Tom Copley, Assembly member over at the GLA, the regime, you know, the system still allows people who want to rent out their homes for tourists to be, yes, take advantage of the 90-day maximum limit of Airbnb, but then jump and hop onto another.
And if you talk to a 20-year-old or 30-year-old living in London, they're in despair. They're telling us they will never, ever be able to own their own home. It just isn't feasible. Rents are high anyway, but the idea of owning their own home, the amount of deposit they've got to find, just makes it completely out of that.
We need opportunities for our
the
young
government
people,
lifted
but
the
also
borrowing
for our
cap.
older people.
The government lifted the borrowing cap to allow you to build more council homes. Are you all seizing that?
So we don't have an HRA, we don't have local council housing,
HRA
so to speak, to allow you to actually borrow to build that council housing. So we're not in that
You're
place.
unusual though, aren't you?
We are, yeah. There's only a couple. There's only a couple of, but we're also unusual because actually our transport connections. We've got no tube. We're one of the very few boroughs in London without any tube stations. So actually, when you get into the London plan and the Mayor's London plan, for build-out purposes, that gets us into contradiction because we do need parking spaces and we need to accept that our travel arrangements are not the same. But we also need houses not only for our young people, but also for our older people.
Absolutely.
Actually, it's not the answer that our older people have got to go into the type of properties that cost an absolute fortune. We've got a number of older people that are living in 1930s semi-detached that actually would like to get some of their assets out, but they still want to be part of the community. They don't want to be shifted off somewhere else. So, you know, with both ends, we need to be creating housing.
Can I ask you all about something related to housing? You all have housing estates. Some of you have really big housing estates. You've got Thamesmead.
Got less now.
One of the problems that we have at the moment in London, violence, knife crime related to drugs. Whenever killings happen, we hear reports from people on council estates saying drug dealing goes on here, nobody does anything about it. Do you recognise that as happening in any of your estates?
It's certainly a concern that's been raised by residents, and since the election back in May, I've been having some serious conversations with the local police, the borough commander, about how we need to demonstrate action in this area, and visibility is a big issue for our residents, particularly in terms of visibility of our neighbourhood police.
So we don't have borough commanders now. We have BCU commanders, because actually we've got three
That's
boroughs.
multiple borough commanders.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So three council areas, three boroughs joined together, and a commander over the three. Littered with problems. Those of us who were there at the time when it was actually considered said, this is a nightmare, you're going to be covering such a big patch, etc, etc. I had to speak to Sophie Linden, the deputy mayor, the other week. The reality is we are not being told when there are problems happening, and it is the council that comes in behind and makes sure that communities are accepting of what's going on, or dealing with what's going on, dealing with the families and the breakouts from some of these things. And we're not being told. So it is a
Can I
problem.
just take issue with what you said, Simon? Because drug dealing is a problem, but to link it so directly with estates certainly isn't something that I recognise in my borough. There are problems, but to say that it's directly connected with estates, actually, I don't think is right. It's happening across the borough. We need to do something about it. And like Teresa, I'm really worried about the impact of the cuts on police in London. I think it's going to have a serious impact as we go further down the line.
And the mayor will say that the police cuts are because the budget has been cut by the government.
So the mayor put up our police precept last year.
Which is his portion of the council tax.
Yeah, and we never saw the extra police as a result of that. It's about to go up again. In Bexley, we've worked that out. That's about 30 policemen. We look forward to seeing those 30 extra coppers on the beat in Bexley. The reality is that the mayor needs to use his money better. Let's spend it on the police. Let's spend what money he's got on the police, and let's get them out. Police have our respect when we see them.
Yeah, but also, Teresa, there's an issue around not only the police needing to be visible, the Mayor of London needs to spend the money better.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there.
Okay.
We have absolutely run out of time. Can I thank all three of you for coming in? Roxana Fiaz, Teresa O'Neill, Ruth Dombey, thank you very much for joining us here on The Late Debate. And I'll be back next month when it will be just 2 weeks before we're due to leave the EU. Until then, thank you for watching and good night.